You would think the
the work for us
WNBA would
behind
be
the
popping
scenes
champagne
every day. It
right
truly
now.
takes a village.
Viewership is up, arenas are sold out, and the media is finally paying attention. But if you peel back the curtain, the mood in the league, just when everyone thought the dust had finally settled on the most chaotic season in WNBA history, a new shockwave has ripped through the Indiana Fever's front office, and this time it has nothing to do with a buzzer beater or a hard foul. Reports are surfacing that the tension behind the scenes in Indiana has reached a boiling point, centered specifically around Caitlin Clark's recent power moves involving NBC and her massive media presence. We aren't just talking about a few disagreements over strategy. We are looking at what insiders are describing as a total meltdown from the old guard management. Fever General Manager Lynn Dunn, a legend in the game who prides herself on discipline and team-first dynamics, is allegedly furious. Not because Clark is playing badly, but because Clark has officially become bigger than the franchise itself. The catalyst? An announcement regarding NBC that signals a shift so massive, it threatens to take the control completely out of the hands of the team owners and place it squarely in the lap of their 22-year-old superstar. If you thought the drama ended when the season buzzer sounded, you couldn't be more wrong, because the real war for the future of the Indiana Fever has just begun, and the front office is losing. But to understand why this specific announcement caused such an explosion behind closed doors, we have to look at what has been bubbling under the surface for months. For the entire season, there was a quiet, brewing resentment between the way the Indiana Fever wanted to run their team and the reality of the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. You had a GM in Lynn Dunn who comes from the old school of basketball, a world where rookies pay their dues, keep their mouths shut, and follow the system. Then you have Clark, who arrived not just as a rookie, but as an economy. She brought the fans, she brought the private jets, and she brought the ratings. The recent news regarding NBC, which is poised to take over a massive chunk of WNBA broadcasting rights, isn't just a TV deal. It represents Caitlin Clark gaining a direct line to the global audience, bypassing the team's PR machine entirely. Sources suggest that the Fever GM felt blindsided by the level of autonomy Clark is flexing. Imagine trying to discipline a player or force them into a specific system when that player has the backing of the biggest media conglomerates in the world. The dynamic has shifted from a player working for a team to a team desperately trying to remain relevant to the player. It is a complete inversion of the power dynamic, and for a GM who has spent decades in control, that loss of authority is enough to cause a massive internal blow-up. But that wasn't the only thing fueling the fire. You have to look at the money, because in professional sports, follow the cash, and you will find the conflict. It is no secret that Caitlin Clark's WNBA salary is laughable compared to what she brings in. We are talking about a base salary that barely scratches $75,000, while her endorsements with Nike, Gatorade, and now her media leverage are worth tens of millions. This creates a terrifying scenario for the Fever front office. Usually, a team controls a player because the player needs the paycheck. If they don't show up to practice, or if they criticize the coach, the team can fine them or threaten their livelihood. That leverage does not exist here. Clark could retire from the WNBA tomorrow and still be one of the richest female athletes on the planet. The explosion from the GM likely stems from the realization that they have absolutely zero leverage over her. The NBC announcement essentially confirmed that Clark is building a media empire that will sustain her long after basketball, or even without it. This makes her unmanageable in the traditional sense. If Lynn Dunn wants to enforce a rule, Clark can simply laugh it off. The fear gripping the Indiana front office is that Clark is preparing to call the shots on everything, from who is on the roster to who is coaching the team. And if they say no, She has the platform to make their lives a living hell. This financial disparity has turned the Fever front office into a pressure cooker, where one wrong move could send their golden goose walking out the door or demanding a trade. And the recent media maneuvers are the first clear sign that Clark knows exactly how much power she holds. However, the tension isn't just about money or media rights. It's about the product on the floor and the sacrificial lambs that have already been slaughtered. We have to talk about the coaching change because the timing of the GM's frustration and the firing of Christie Sides is not a coincidence. For months, fans and analysts were screaming that the Fever were not utilizing Clark correctly. The offensive schemes were slow, the rotations were questionable, and the chemistry was clunky. When the Fever fired Sides and brought in Stephanie White, it looked like a victory for Clark. But rumors speculate that this decision wasn't exactly what the GM wanted to do initially. Lynn Dunn has a history of loyalty, and being forced to axe a coach after making the playoffs likely didn't sit well. It feels like a move made to appease Clark, a move made out of fear. The explosion following the NBC news is likely the result of the cumulative stress of having to govern a team that is being held hostage by the expectations of one player's fan base. The NBC deal means more eyes, more scrutiny, and more pressure. Every mistake the management makes will now be broadcast in 4K resolution to a global audience. The GM knows that if the team starts slow next season, or if the new coach doesn't click immediately, the narrative on NBC won't be "the team is learning." It will be "the Fever management is failing Caitlin." That is a nightmare scenario for any executive. They are no longer operating in the shadows. They are under a microscope, and the person holding the microscope is the very player they are supposed to be managing. It's a claustrophobic position to be in, and it's no wonder tempers are flaring in the boardroom. But we need to go darker. We need to talk about the physical beating Clark took and how the front office's reaction, or lack thereof, played into this current crisis. Throughout the season, we saw Clark get headshotted, shoved, checked, and knocked to the floor more than any rookie in history. The Kennedy Carter incident was just the tip of the iceberg. What drove fans crazy and reportedly frustrated Clark's camp was the silence from the Fever organization. Where were the enforcers? Where was the GM calling out the league for allowing their star to be treated like a punching bag? The lack of public defense for Clark created a rift. Now, with the NBC partnership and Clark's increasing media power, she doesn't need the team to defend her anymore. She can control the narrative herself. This terrifies the GM because it means the team can no longer spin the story. If Clark goes on a major NBC feature and says, "I didn't feel protected by my organization," it would be a PR catastrophe that could cost people their jobs. The GM's explosive reaction to the NBC news is likely a preemptive panic, realizing that they missed their chance to earn her loyalty by protecting her when it mattered. Now, she has the microphone, and she has the audience. And if she decides to expose the internal lack of support, there is nothing Lynn Dunn can do to stop it. The silence of the past season is coming back to haunt them, and the volume is about to get turned all the way up. And then there is the unrivaled factor. This is the wild card that has every WNBA GM sweating, but specifically the Fever. The new 3-on-3 league founded by Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier is offering massive salaries and equity. There has been intense speculation about whether Clark will join and to what extent. The NBC announcement could be tied to documenting her journey across these different leagues, effectively branding her as a basketball mercenary rather than just an Indiana Fever player. If Clark decides to prioritize unrivaled, or uses it as leverage to demand fewer minutes, or load management in the WNBA, The Fever GM is powerless. Imagine the conversation. Clark says she's tired from the 3v3 circuit and wants to sit out a WNBA game. The GM says no. Clark's camp leaks to NBC that the Fever are running her into the ground. The backlash would be instantaneous. The explosion is the realization that the WNBA season is no longer the only show in town. Clark has options. She doesn't need to grind out 40 minutes a night in Indiana to pay her rent. She can make millions playing 3-on-3 in Miami in January. This devalues the WNBA contract and drives the GM crazy because it reduces the Fever to just one of the places Clark plays, rather than the place she plays. It diminishes the franchise's importance, and for a proud organization with a championship history, being treated like a side hustle is the ultimate insult. But this goes beyond just business. It is personal. We have to look at the clash of personalities. Lynn Dunn is 77 years old. She has seen it all. She believes in the grind, the system, and the respect for the hierarchy. Caitlin Clark represents the Gen Z disruption. Fast, loud, autonomous, and unwilling to wait her turn. Reports of the GM exploding paint a picture of a generational clash. It's the frustration of an old-school boss realizing the new employee runs the company. There have likely been closed-door meetings where the management tried to assert authority, only to be met with the reality of Clark's metrics. You cannot argue with the numbers. Clark increased attendance by triple digits. She single-handedly made the Fever the most-watched team in the league. When you bring that much value, you don't take orders, you give them. The friction comes from the GM's inability to accept this new reality. They want the benefits of Clark's fame, the sold-out arenas, the jersey sales, without the loss of control that comes with it. But you cannot have it both ways. The NBC announcement was a reminder that Clark is a global brand, and the Fever are just a local franchise lucky enough to have her. This ego blow is likely the root cause of the emotional reaction from management. They want to take credit for the success, but they hate that they are passengers in the vehicle that Clark is driving. Furthermore, we have to consider the locker room dynamics that the GM is desperately trying to manage. It's not just about Clark. It's about how the other players react to this. Aaliyah Boston, a former #1 pick and an incredible player in her own right, has had to adjust her entire game to fit Clark. Kelsey Mitchell had the best season of her life, but all the cameras were pointed at Caitlin. The GM's job is to keep the team unified. When Clark makes massive solo moves with NBC, it isolates her further from the group. It reinforces the idea that it is Caitlin versus the world, rather than the Indiana Fever. The GM's explosion might be rooted in the fear that this superstar status will destroy the locker room chemistry they are trying to build. How do you tell other players to sacrifice for the team when the star player is operating like a separate corporate entity? It creates a two-tiered system, the star and everyone else. Managing that resentment is a nightmare, and every time Clark announces a new massive deal that doesn't involve her teammates, the wedge grows deeper. The front office knows that if the locker room turns on Clark, the team falls apart. But if they cater too much to Clark, they lose the locker room anyway. It is a no-win situation for Lynn Dunn, and the stress of walking that tightrope is clearly taking its toll. Let's not forget the league-wide context. The Indiana Fever GM also has to deal with the pressure from the WNBA league office. The other owners and GMs are jealous. They are tired of the Caitlin Clark show overshadowing their own efforts. There are likely whispers and complaints in league meetings about how the Fever are handling things, accusing them of giving Clark too much power. Lynn Dunn is caught in the middle. trying to defend her franchise while also trying to manage the monster they have created. The NBC announcement adds fuel to the fire because it gives Clark a platform that the league cannot censor. If the WNBA refs continue to make questionable calls, or if the league's scheduling is unfair, Clark can highlight that on a national scale. The Fever GM is the one who has to answer the angry phone calls from the league commissioner when Clark speaks out. This announcement effectively removed the mute button. The explosion is the realization that the safety rails are gone. Anything that happens in Indiana next season will be magnified times 1,000, and the front office is not prepared for that level of scrutiny. They are already exhausted from one season. The prospect of doing it again, but with even higher stakes and less control, is enough to make anyone snap. So, what happens next? This is the question that should worry every Fever fan. If the relationship between the GM and the star is truly this fractured, we are looking at a ticking time bomb. The history of the NBA and WNBA tells us that when a superstar and a GM go to war, the superstar almost always wins. We could be seeing the early stages of a power play where Clark's camp forces a change in the front office. If Lynn Dunn cannot adapt to the modern era of player empowerment, she might be forced out. The NBC announcement serves as a signal that Clark is building her own infrastructure. She is insulating herself with media power, financial independence, and fan loyalty. She is daring the Fever to stand in her way. The explosion we are hearing about is the sound of the old guard realizing they have lost the war before the first battle of the next season has even been fought. The Fever management has a choice. They can embrace the chaos, give Clark the keys to the kingdom, and ride the wave to a potential championship. Or they can try to clamp down, assert their authority, and watch the entire thing implode. The rumors of anger and frustration suggest they are currently choosing the latter. And that is a dangerous game to play with someone who has the entire sports world watching her every move. In the end, this isn't just about a basketball player and a general manager. This is about the evolution of women's sports. Caitlin Clark is the prototype of the future athlete, powerful, wealthy, and independent. The Indiana Fever front office is the prototype of the past, rigid, hierarchical, and slow to adapt. The collision between these two forces was inevitable, but the NBC announcement accelerated the timeline. The explosion inside the Fever facility is just the aftershock of the realization that the franchise no longer belongs to the owners. It belongs to the talent. As we look toward the next season, keep your eyes on the sidelines. Not just for the plays, but for the body language between the management and the star. The smiles might be there for the cameras, but behind the scenes, the battle lines have been drawn. And in this game of power, Caitlin Clark has just played an ace that the GM simply cannot beat. The question isn't if things will change in Indiana, but how many people will be fired before the organization accepts that it is Caitlin's world, and they are just living in it.